It's an industry that's never been considered very female-friendly. The so-called glass ceiling phenomenon is certainly present in the financial sector. And while women do make up more than 40% of the entire labor force at S&P 500 companies, just 4% of them are CEOs. That's only 20 positions, and that's down from 24 positions last year. All of the news is bleak. Women now hold 20% of the board seats at the largest companies, and that is up from 15% a decade ago. We're joined now by Karina Huber, who recently interviewed a woman who knows firsthand about the male-dominated culture on Wall Street. Karina.
Well, that's right. The woman I met is Maureen Sherry. She's a former managing director at Bear Stearns who worked there for 12 years. Now, she's just released a tell-all book on what life is like for working mothers on Wall Street titled Opening Belle. It is fictional, but much of it is inspired by Sherry's own experiences and the experiences of her female colleagues. Now, I sat down with her recently and I began by asking her what the environment was like for her shortly after returning to work after becoming a first-time mother.
I was the only nursing mother there on this giant trading floor, so there was a bit of fascination with that. This was before people had express rooms and things like that, so I was told to go to maybe the nurse's office, and when I would have to take my breast pump from under my desk, it was this very visible sort of walk of shame to go do that.
Now, I did read that they would make cow sounds when you would
You
go.
mean a mooing sound?
A mooing sound, yes.
Mother of a
true?
2-year-old, you should know these things. Yeah, no, it happened a few times. And it's sort of the culture. I worked in a very, different investment banks have different cultures. Bear Stearns was particularly a little more wild, I think, than some places. And yeah, so one trader would start to moo and then the herd would do something similar. Do I think it was meant to be hurtful or embarrassing? Not really. I think it's joked. They joked around all the time.
Pranksters. So
They're pranksters.
A little bit like a frat kind of
very much
atmosphere?
Like a frat atmosphere. And so some, I think the women I initially worked with who were my age, we were sort of used to it. We were a little bit thicker skinned. And one of my jobs was to interview women who were prospectively thinking of coming to work there. And so as the years went on, the intolerance of that sort of behavior by younger women became really apparent to me. And then it bothered me more. And it bothered me more because we were losing good talent.
So at the time, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. But with hindsight, you look back and think the behavior was pretty outrageous?
It was pretty outrageous. I did think so at the time. But as I grew older, it even became more apparent.
I get the sense that you weren't really able to express the joy of being a mother while you were at work. Were men able to express the joys of fatherhood?
Well, when they come in with all the cigars and yeah, so clearly there's a little bit of a double standard there. Of course you're thrilled and people obviously know you've had a baby, you've been gone for a bit, but there's also since it is primarily male dominated and many of their wives are at home, are staying at home and working from the home like that, it's a little bit, you're a little bit, you're just treated a little bit differently. And so, yes, I would say that I've never hung up a picture of a child or really, made cute noises into the phone when I'm talking to one of them, which I found the men I worked with did.
They were able to do that.
They were able to do it more freely. And do I think they would? I think you're just seen as less professional.
Was there much camaraderie with the other women that you worked with? Was there a sense that you could speak to each other frankly and talk about some of the challenges you faced being women in that atmosphere?
So that wasn't a natural thing to do there. It's very much seen as a team. A tremendous amount of athletes end up, for some reason, I think it's the competitive nature of it, love working in that environment, and I loved it also. But to start sort of sharing stories or maybe whining or not being so team-oriented was not really something that I saw done. It was only many years into it that one woman shared a particularly egregious story with some of us. And then we all started to talk. And it was so powerful to share at that moment. We called ourselves jokingly the Glass Ceiling Club. But we did start to regularly meet. And it was, mostly fun to talk. And then we started to think, well, what can we do to change the culture?
There has been a lot of change on the surface of things. As you mentioned, there's these lawsuits and these settlements. There also seems to be an effort in the financial community to address some of these problems that working mothers have. That's on the surface of things. Do you think much has changed?
So to keep my story in the book current, I went back and talked to people who still work in that environment, and about the same age as my protagonist, who's about mid-30s. And so initially I thought, wow, everything seems much more well-behaved around here. There seem to be a few more women, not tremendously changed, but a few more women. And I thought, okay, this is really good. And so, but then I would sit down and speak with them. And so visually, it all looks pretty good. And then when you start to scratch the surface, it doesn't feel like much has changed at all. Earnings-wise, there's a study out of Bloomberg News where they studied MBA graduates going into finance. Dollar for dollar is what they're hired for. 6 to 7 years later, women are down to 68 cents on the dollar. The rate of attrition still remains very high once you get to a level such as managing director. So women are leaving. Obviously, if you're leaving a very lucrative and interesting job like that, what is making you leave? I don't believe that it's always to raise a family, especially since many of these women were the primary breadwinner. So some things have changed and some things really have not.
So still a lot more has to be done. Now, Sherry interviewed a lot of other women working on Wall Street for Opening Belle and says it was in part to protect those women that she chose fiction instead of a memoir to talk about the male-dominated culture on Wall Street. Now, the book will be getting the star treatment. Opening Belle is being made into a feature film with Reese Witherspoon, which will make it the first movie about women on Wall Street since 1988's Working Girl.
Melanie Griffith, I remember that one, an 80s classic. Thanks so much, Karina Huber. And you can see more of Karina's interview with Maureen Sherry on our website. And Sherry explains why Reese Witherspoon and her production company would be the perfect fit to make Opening Belle a feature film. It's part of our One More Question on cctv-america.com. And just click on the Woman at Work tab.